Man, I'm not making that much money. Why can't they just pass a reform to increase the minimum wage?
I know, right? It's not like the economy is hard to control. Just experiment with some bills, pass the right ones, and we're good to go.
Actually, the economy is a lot more complicated than that.
How, look at FDR, he helped the economy so much and so easily in a short amount of time.
Actually, that's not true. But what is true is that in his first 100 days of presidency, FDR signed in a lot of legislation like the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which aimed to put an end to the Great Depression. However, despite his best efforts, the Great Depression still persisted. The economy wheezed, unemployment continued. I mean, yeah, he was a great president, but there's not many like him today.
No way. I always thought that FDR was the amazing guy that saved us from the Great Depression.
What the?
No, you're right. FDR was a great president, but the economy is just not that easy to control, even with all the tools in his arsenal. After his first attempt, FDR released a second New Deal, which consisted of more aggressive federal programs. He created the Works Progress Administration, which gave jobs for unemployed workers to build bridges, schools, highways, and parks. FDR signed in dozens of more liberal New Deal programs like the Wagner Act, Social Security Act, yet even after all of that, he still couldn't resolve the Great Depression. In 1936, when campaigning for his second term, he said,
"The forces of organized money are unanimous in their hate towards me, and I welcome their hatred. I should like to have it said of my first administration that in it, the forces of selfishness and lust for power have met their match. And I should like to have it said of my second administration that in it, these forces have met their master."
4 more years! 4 more years! 4 more years!
People believe that the economy can easily be controlled, but that's nothing but a myth. The contrasting views of the Democrats and Republicans are one of the factors as to why economic gridlock always happens. Both of them have their own agendas. And as for the Democrats, they focus on keeping unemployment low, which is the rate or percentage of Americans looking for work but are unable to find it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps track of this every month.
What about Americans like my uncle? He just got tired for searching for a job that did not exist.
What about the ones that just set up for a part-time job?
Don't get confused. Follow me. The BLS does report on situations like that. And it's called the underemployment rate, which measures those that just gave up looking for employment and those that just settled for a part-time job. In 2012, the national unemployment rate was 7.9%, and the underemployment rate was 14.6%. Now as for the conservatives, they focus on curbing inflation rates.
What's inflation? Is it like inflating a balloon?
Kind of. Inflation is a rise in prices for goods and services. The BLS also measures this through the Consumer Price Index, which takes into account the changes in prices of products. Because of inflation, the CPI has to create a measure that reflects the changes of spending over time that consumers have to do in order to achieve a certain standard of living. Historically, oil and inflation has had a cause and effect relationship, whereas whenever Americans' connection to oil has been disrupted, typically with the Middle East, inflation has achieved a rise in price.
Where's my oil?
You know what we need to do to improve the economy? We need to fight against inflation.
No. We have to decrease unemployment rates.
Sorry, what did you just say? I said
And that's not the only thing that separates Democrats and Republicans. They also disagree on America's fiscal policy, the use of the federal budget. Democrats mostly adhere to John Maynard Keynes' economic theory dubbed Keynesian economics. This is basically the government spending its way out of economies' ups and downs. FDR used this trick in his New Deal days, and in 2009, Obama's $787 billion stimulus package followed this theory as well.
Haha, and we all know how much that helped unemployment, right?
True, nobody expected unemployment rates to skyrocket to as much as 10%. Republicans, on the other hand, follow supply-side economics, otherwise known as the trickle-down theory. First adopted by Ronald Reagan, the main idea is for fiscal policy to stimulate the supply of goods, not the demand. Supporters believe that there's too much government regulation of the economy and propose lower taxes so people are more motivated to produce more. The goal is to have tax cuts for the wealthy so they're able to invest into their businesses and thus create more jobs. It trickles down from there. However, when Reagan implemented this policy, he about tripled the nation's debt from $900 billion to $2.7 trillion. In more recent events, President-elect Donald Trump also looks to continue this policy as he looks to lower government regulation and taxes to create more jobs. Runner-up presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has suitably dubbed his policy Trumped Up, Trickle Down.
The kind of plan that Donald has put forth would be trickle-down economics all over again. In fact, it would be the most extreme version, the biggest tax cuts for the top percent of the people in this country than we've ever had. I call it trumped up trickle-down, because that's exactly...
The economy will only improve if we cut taxes and spend less.
No, if we raise taxes and spend more, then everything will get better.
Clearly, both fiscal approaches are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Keynesians want to increase government spending to stimulate demand. Supply-side advocates want to lower taxes to stimulate supply.
You know what? Trump sounds absolutely right. We don't need government intervention. This is America, the land of the free, capitalism, free market economy.
Yeah, screw socialism. Screw Bernie Sanders. We don't need that. The Congress has no power over what we do.
Well, actually, that's not completely true. Capitalism makes it harder for the government to control the economy. The choices made by the consumers and businesses have more impact on the economy compared to government policies. The public sector is nothing but an ant compared to the dominating private sector of America. It's actually the people that makes the majority of our economic decisions. And if you think Congress has no power over what you do, think again. Under the Constitution's Commerce Clause, Congress has the ability to regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with the Indian tribes.
Well, it can only regulate those things, right? That's not a lot.
Not exactly. As a result of the landmark court case, Wickard v. Filburn, Congress also has the ability to regulate anything that could indirectly affect commerce as well. An Ohio farmer, Roscoe Filburn, was farming wheat in his farm to feed his animals. The government had already established limits on how much wheat a farmer can grow based on the acreage he owns.
Wow, the government would use its power on a single farmer? That doesn't sound like regulating interstate commerce to me.
It doesn't, but he went above the limits of how much wheat he can farm, and eventually he got fined $117. But he fought the fine and took it to court.
The wheat was not sold in interstate commerce, so the penalty could not apply to me.
Your wheat growing activities reduce the amount of wheat you would buy for animal feed on the open market, which is traded nationally and is therefore within the scope of the U.S. Constitution's Commerce Clause. The defendant is guilty.
Aren't you reaching too much?
No, don't think so.
Wow, that doesn't sound like the America I know and love.
Well, America's not the perfect place that you imagine it to be. There are many laws and regulations that the government has to implement in order for the economy to run smoothly. Without the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, it would be very easy for inflation to rise and the economy to spiral out of control.
Well, what does the Federal Reserve Act do that makes it so important?
The Federal Reserve Act started something really important to the country, and that is the Federal Reserve System, also known as the Fed. The Fed is the central banking system of the U.S. It basically regulates the lending practices of banks and the money supply. The government has to manipulate the supply of money in private hands in order to steer the economy, and that is through the Fed's monetary policies. With monetary policies comes an economic theory called monetarism. Supply of money equals key to nation's economic wealth.
So if we supplied the banks with more money, we'd be considered more economically wealthy?
More money. The Fed buys and sells bonds, which means it also determines whether or not a bank has more or less money to lend out. The more money a bank has, the cheaper it is to borrow. The less money a bank has, the more expensive it is to borrow. This inconsistency spurred the government to amend the Federal Reserve Act in 1977. This amendment imposed a dual mandate on the Fed to stabilize the dollar and promote maximum sustainable output and employment. What the government is trying to do is find a perfect balance.
It's all good and well that the government controls rates and inflation, but who makes sure that the monopolies don't rain terror and jack up the prices to whatever they want?
Government does that too.
What, really? They have to keep track of so much. No wonder why it's so hard to control the government.
Yeah, the government does do a lot, but if they didn't do anything about the railways back in 1887, who knows how much a train ticket would cost today?
Who even uses a train today?
People still do, believe it or not, but back then it was a major mode of transportation. Realizing this, railroad companies charge outrageous prices, causing a public outcry on this monopoly. And thus, the government passed the Interstate Commerce Act, requiring that railroad rates be reasonable and just. And they also created the Interstate Commerce Commission to govern the railroad companies to ensure that they comply with the new regulations. This was the first time that the government took steps to regulate a private company. Nowadays, this just doesn't apply to railroads, but also other modes of transportation, like busing, trucking, or even Uber.
Wow, I'm so glad that we have the government to depend on to create and regulate economic policy.
Not so fast. There's one more thing about how government makes our economic policies that might change your mind. And that's through an iron triangle.
Triangle? I played the triangle back in high school.
Not that kind of triangle. I'm talking about the government iron triangle. This iron triangle includes special interest groups, bureaucratic agencies, and legislative committees. These three groups form a special relationship where they are able to mutually rely on each other to sustain their position in their specific areas. The special interest groups lobby and finance committee members to make sure that their special interests are being fulfilled. The committee members, not wanting to lose support from their constituencies, depend on the bureaucratic agencies to create these special interest policies. The government agencies are able to make the policies thanks to the extra budget provided by the committee members. As a result, committee members receive more support from their constituencies. Agencies are happy with having a larger budget, and the special interest groups are happy that their special interests are being fulfilled. Together, they are able to make federal policies related to areas such as environment, our national defense, security, and so on.
So what's wrong with the government actually working together to create policies?
What's wrong is that when members more interested in representing the general interest of society become blocked, altering any of the policy-making process already established in the Iron Triangle.
Can I join?
Off.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, I tried to join up with different groups, but none of them let me in, so I was all alone.
I'm sorry about that, man. A real possible Iron Triangle right now is between the real estate interest groups, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, the House and Senate budget committees, and the Federal Housing Financing Agency. In the 2008 mortgage crisis, mortgage giants Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, who profit off buying and reselling mortgages, lost 90% of their profits in the last year. As a result, the Federal Housing Financing Agency had to create a bailout plan which costed taxpayers $154 billion.
Why would a bureaucratic agency bail out a private company?
Good question. Well, it turns out that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were past lobbyists for Congress members, part of the House and Senate Budget Committee. The committee saw that their lobbying friends were in trouble and decided to post their confidence in the corporations. It didn't work out, and taxpayers had to deal with billions of dollars to restabilize them.
At this point, I don't even know what to think anymore.
Don't be discouraged. Recall the fact that the government actually has a lot of trouble controlling our economy. The federal government only takes up a quarter of our GDP. We take up the rest. The economy cannot just heal like that. Reforms take months to go into full effect. The economic decisions that the consumers make are a lot more important than the ones made back in DC. What are you doing?
I'm moving to Canada.
Why?
What do you mean, why? The economy is too unstable, and worst of all, Trump is elected. Peace.